Are we on the path to peace in the Russia-Ukraine war? Or are we on a path to even more war? That's a valid question because it's unquestioned where President Trump wants to go, and that is on the direction of peace. He is trying to get this war over with. He's starting to show more of his frustration, but determination that it is still where he's going to go, despite a lot of pressure to go in different directions. But the question is he going to be able to succeed? Because it's not enough for him alone to be able to go down this path. There's got to be other partners to go with him. And then there's that thorny issue of the Ukraine side. We'll get to that in a second. But first of all, to try and talk about a lot of this and make some sense out of things that don't seem to make a lot of sense is Larry Johnson, former CIA analyst and friend of the show. Larry, welcome back.
Thanks. That's my quality. I don't make sense. So,
yeah, no, to the contrary, I think you make more sense than nearly anybody. And you know, I just want to, first of all, just from what you've seen so far, do you think that Trump is just posturing that he wants to end the war? Do you think he really does want to end the Russia-Ukraine war?
He wants to end it, but he's not paying attention to what the Russians are saying. You know, he's taken too much. He has too much confidence in his art of the deal, thinking that he can coerce this. And I do give him credit that he put Witkoff basically in charge, because the reason Witkoff, I think, is being effective with Putin is that both Putin and Witkoff are lawyers. And, you know, anybody that's been around lawyers know that the training they go through to become a lawyer teaches you a particular way to think, to look at the world, to weigh risk, to weigh evidence. And I think Putin, you know, part of that 5-hour talk they had last Friday, was, you know, Putin talking lawyer to lawyer, and Witkoff finally coming away and beginning to understand that this is the Russians they're not playing a game. He understands the legal dimensions. Putin is very legalistic. He takes agreements seriously, and he takes the letter of the law seriously. And, you know, as he's laying that out, I think Witkoff finally came to grasp that. Trump, however, though, is caught in between. You know, he's got the war hawks, the Michael Waltz and Marco Rubio and Pete Hegseth, but they're countered, I believe, by the likes of JD Vance. So, but it's ultimately on Trump's shoulders. He's going to have to figure out what to do.
You know, I want to, before we get specifically into some of these sound bites that I want your reaction to, I want to just like park on that issue with Steve Witkoff for a second, because ordinarily you would expect it to be your Secretary of State to be leading these negotiations. It would be the Secretary of State that's going to see Putin, or to see the Minister of Foreign Affairs, Sergei Lavrov, et cetera. But other than like that beginning visit in Riyadh or Jeddah in Saudi Arabia, I've hardly heard anything about Secretary of State Marco Rubio. Why do you suppose that is?
Well, because frankly, he's not qualified to do this. He doesn't enjoy Trump's confidence in with respect to negotiating these matters. Witkoff is a genuine, true loyalist. Marco Rubio isn't. Marco Rubio's a sort of a Johnny-come-lately. So they send him off to do other things. I think Rubio sees his job as keeping Trump on the Zionist bandwagon, which gets us off into other issues.
Yeah, we might want to go down that one later on. It just is an odd look, but anyway, we'll leave that one for the moment. But I want to get into something here, because I think you look at what Trump has been saying lately, because this soundbite from a couple of days ago in the Oval Office is something that a lot of people are reacting to. It's gotten a lot of interest, in that Trump is basically saying everybody except me is responsible for the start of this war.
Biden could have stopped it, and Zelenskyy could have stopped it, and Putin should have never started it. Everybody's to blame.
Have you spoken to President Zelenskyy, sir, about his offer to purchase more Patriot missile batteries?
Oh, I don't know. He's always looking to purchase missiles. You know, he's against. Listen, when you start a war, you got to know that you can win the war, right? You don't start a war against somebody that's 20 times your size, and then hope that people give you some missiles.
So I want to zero in on the last part of that first and connect it to the first, because he said in the beginning of that clip there, he said Russia started it. So he said that at first, but then most of the Western media has focused on the last part of it, where he said Zelenskyy shouldn't have started a war that he couldn't win against somebody who's 20 times bigger than him. So he seems to imply that both Russia and Ukraine started it. And I just want to ask, is there some truth to both of them? Because obviously it was the Russians that physically engaged on February 2022, but is there also truth that Zelenskyy partially started it?
No, we started it, the United States. Now, go back and look at August 21st, 2021 in the National Interest, an article by A. Wes Mitchell, Wes spelled W-E-S-S. Mitchell had been tasked by the Pentagon's Office of Net Assessments the previous year to deal with this whole question of basically how do we contain Russia and China? What are our options? What's going to make sense? And I was unaware of this article till yesterday, thanks to Alexander Vikuras, our mutual friend. And when I read it, I was stunned, shocked. This Mitchell, he's a smart guy. Speaks German, English. Is well educated anyway, and he was at a diplomat at State Department, and has held some high positions. But what he lays out in there is that the strategy, what the policy elite in DC are concerned about, is that if Russia and China come together, we're going to be overwhelmed. Well, guess what? That's happened. But this is they're trying to figure out a strategy. How do we keep them apart? And the strategy he lays out is using Ukraine in the same way that Afghanistan was used against the Soviets. Basically, starting a war between Russia and Ukraine, getting Russia bogged down, where the United States is doing what we've done. He lays it out. That's why I said we did this. We set up the conditions, as Scott Horton's book, you can see over my shoulder, correctly notes, provoked. We provoked Russia into doing this in order to ultimately weaken them, because we've got a racist policy with respect to the Chinese. Those Russians don't want to be around the Chinese, a bunch of yellow dinks. I mean, it's disgusting that we think that, the Russians are more like us. They don't want to be around those Chinese. And in fact,
wait. So we actually intentionally said, hey, how's about we split Russia and China by going after Russia through Ukraine and thinking that that's going to put a blanket between Russia and China?
So part of it was we got to really lay a defeat, do a beat down on Russia. Prove Russia that once they get their nose bloodied by us, they're going to want to come around and be our friend and recognize they don't want to take on China. The guy wrote this.
Yeah, I got to find that article.
Yeah, you got. When you read it, be sitting down. I don't want you standing up, because you'll read it, you'll pass out.
Right. Appreciate the safety concern there. I will take that into consideration.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness. Yeah. Well, that's okay. So I guess you can add to it, because Zelenskyy himself certainly bears some burden of the portion of the responsibility. He did make the decision not to seek any kind of negotiated settlement, not to take any of the options to short of war that Russia offered, not to take the Minsk agreements, etc. But I was actually unaware of this, that we had more culpability than I knew, which obviously wasn't small anyway. But
yeah,
that's troubling.
And remember, with Zelenskyy, he won election on the promise, hey, man, I'm going to deliver on this Minsk II. We're going to get this war settled. We're going to reconcile with Russia. We're going to have peace. That's what the Ukrainians voted for. Man, talk about doing a Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde. Once Zelenskyy gets into office and he's a captive of this right sector, this ultra right wing elements that are aligned with the mustache man from Bavaria. It was game on. Provoke. And this was, like I said, this was not something that the Russians cooked up and that we reacted to. as you'll see in this paper, it was planned. It was part of Pentagon planning. The only problem was we had a lot of false assumptions. One of the assumptions Mr. Mitchell made was, boy, those Russians they're economically weak and their military's a mess. So we'll be easy. It'll be easy to beat them. They can't stand up to us, the mighty USA.
Yeah, how'd that work out?
Yeah.
So getting back to the Trump part here. So now that we've established that there's multiple parties that got this in, probably the least of all of them was the Russian side. But let's look at how people are reacting today. So as I mentioned, when Trump made that, it got a lot of comments all across the political map here. First, I want to look at is from the Ukrainian side. This is a woman named Hannah Shellist from a Ukrainian think tank. And she has some not surprising views on Trump's comments.
It's always easy just to forget about the problem rather than solve it. That's like when you have a small wound, for example, on your hand, what you're going to do, to put some medicine on it or just to cut. What Mr. Witkoff is proposing, de facto, is cutting, not caring that the person that you cut the hand would just bleed to the death. And because that's much easier, definitely, to trade somebody else's territories when it doesn't belong to you, when it's not your people, when you've never been and don't care about people on the ground.
Now, some say that the Americans are forgetting that this is not a real estate deal. If these territories are kept by Russia, this is going to mean ethnic cleansing.
It's already meant, because if you follow the news of the last year, you are from the occupied territories, and a lot of the official Russian decrees issued for these territories, de facto, it is more and more of the pressing, even genocidal, sometimes decrees. For example, you cannot get any basic support, including medical or to register your kid, if you don't have Russian passport. If you wear something blue and yellow, you can be arrested.
Okay, I want to look at two separate things that she said there. We'll take them in order. The first one is that basically she and the reporter fall fallacy to this idea that there is a choice that can be made. You can, instead of saying we're going to support, which Trump and Witkoff have, the giving up of the occupied territories, and that you can choose something different, that you can literally choose to go in a different direction. You cannot cut the hand off, as in using her analogy there. The war reporter, the reporter for the segment there seems to think the same thing. Is that accurate? Is there an alternative to what Witkoff has said about giving up the 5 territories?
No. Russia's not giving it up. In fact, Russia's going to end up taking more. I think they'll take every Dnipropetrovsk, Sumy. They're going to even take Kiev. They will take Kiev and Odessa before this is over, and not a thing that the Ukrainians can do to stop it. It is, go back to that original Trump's comment. Biden could have stopped this. Zelenskyy could have stopped this. Hey, Mr. Trump, you can stop this. You can stop it tomorrow. Pull the plug. Withdraw U.S. advisors, stop all financial aid. But he's not doing that. He's continuing to allow it to go on. So this war was going to be settled on the battlefield. It's not going to be settled at a negotiating table.
Yeah, actually, I actually published an article yesterday in the publication 1945 saying exactly that thing. It is time for Trump to walk. Because he doesn't have a legitimate partner in Zelenskyy who's working at cross purposes with everything he wants to do. We'll see if he does it. I've heard from some sources that he actually is getting close to doing that, which what you've just said, Doug McGregor said on the show almost verbatim yesterday. So I think a lot of voices who recognize the realities are coming to that same conclusion, but we'll see. You have to actually do it. Yeah.
Trump's acting like he's a spectator, he's sitting in the stands at a football game, man. Hey, dude, you're the head coach. You're calling the plays. So take some responsibility. Either resign, leave the field, or, do something about it.
Make the call. Yeah. The second thing I want to look at what she had to say there is an accusation that in the occupied territories of the Ukrainian people inside what, before February 2024 or 22 was Ukrainian territory, et cetera. they're saying that the Russians are systematically oppressing all of those people. Is that true?
No, it's not true. And in fact, in all of those territories, it came out in massive turnout. Even under wartime circumstances, they had a massive turnout. People were not coerced at gunpoint to go out and vote. They weren't told if you don't vote, you don't eat. None of that. And yet, overwhelming, 80% of the population in each of those areas voted to, hey, we'd much rather hang with Russia than stay in Ukraine. So, and part of that is the Russian speakers and the discriminatory acts that have been passed by the Rada in Kiev. That's where the actual persecution of these people is taking place. And she's just that young lady is just doing a little bit of what's called projection. One way, if your listeners and viewers want to have some fun, pull up one of the our artificial intelligence search engines, type in the question: how many cities, towns, villages has Russia captured and held since January of 2024? Comes out with quite a list. Didn't say the same thing for Ukraine. How many cities, towns, hamlets, and villages has Ukraine captured and held since 2024? You know what you get? 0. And yet they want to call this a stalemate. It's just, it's ridiculous.
Wow.
But you can't cite a single place that they could say, well, what about Kursk? Yeah, what about Kursk? They went in there, they had their high water mark middle of September of 2024. And then after that, the car's been in reverse. They've got 70,000 casualties minimum, hundreds of tanks and armored vehicles destroyed. And for what? They accomplished nothing.
Yep, almost all of it's gone now. Also, I want to look at one other Ukrainian who has some thoughts on the matter. Not quite the direction as the previous speaker there, though. This is Alexander Dubinsky, who is a Ukrainian member of parliament. It's my understanding he is still an active member of parliament in jail because he did not say the right things that Zelenskyy wanted to hear. And recently, he said this specifically to Trump.
I was the first to warn that Zelenskyy would undermine peace initiatives and launch an anti-Trump campaign ahead of the U.S. elections. I was the first to say he would weaponize American aid for political survival, not for peace. And I remain the only active member of Ukraine's parliament who openly advocates for peace, despite incarceration and repression.
Is he right on that? Is Zelenskyy actually undermining peace to continue the war?
Oh yeah, absolutely. As long as the war goes on, he gets a payday. And let's not discount the importance of money in all of this. Zelenskyy is doing everything in his power to sabotage it. And again, I look at Trump and say, why are you allowing yourself to be disrespected in this way? Because we own Zelenskyy, like it or not. But Zelensky's been he's been the organ grinder monkey in all of this. We played the music and he's jumped around. Now he doesn't like the new owner of the organ.
One of the other people who have been negative about Trump's comment about basically agreeing to sign over the territory as a condition to get to an end of the war is Sky News, and Sir Michael Clark was saying that he disagrees with what Trump says here. Now, it's interesting as you watch this. He's going to say at the first of it that he just categorically disagrees with what Trump is saying, but then he provides some evidence that almost completely corroborates what Trump said.
When he blames Zelenskyy for starting the war, what he kind of means is that he wasn't skillful enough to head it off.
Right.
And when you look at the politics of what happened in 2022 and between 2019, when Zelenskyy became president, and 2022, there is no basis for that, in fact. Zelenskyy tried to go back to the Minsk II agreement, which had been concluded after 2014, and he tried to lean toward Russia in that he tried to bring an end to the problem, to be pragmatic and to say, let's get this off the table as a problem. And when he tried to lean towards the Russian position, we're talking about neutrality and giving up on the idea of joining NATO, and they were all possibly acceptable at the time for him under certain circumstances. But his hardliners in his own party wouldn't let him do it.
Yeah.
And so he backed away from it and then found that the Russians were building up this pressure.
Okay. So he says, yeah, there's no truth to that, except then he says, yeah, Zelenskyy wanted to go down that path, which you said a minute ago, but then his own hardliners inside his government blocked him from doing that. And then he just says, and then all of a sudden this pressure starts coming from Russia. That's the part where he was way off base. In fact, Gary, if you can toss that headline up there, this is from March 2021, when there was a very specific reason why the Zelenskyy passed this deal, probably under the same pressure that that Michael Clark is talking about, that signed this decree on the strategy, deoccupation, and reintegration of the temporarily occupied territory of Crimea and Sevastopol, which of course were hard red lines for the Russians. And it was 1 month after this was decree was signed that Russia started its first military buildup. So it was not for no reason, but this doubles down on Clark's comments and your statements that it's the hardliners that have pushing Zelenskyy to go where where we don't want him to go anyway.
Well, and let's recognize that those hardliners most likely were responding to encouragement and direction provided by Central Intelligence Agency and British MI6. So this was, like I said, this was not an accident. This was not a case of Russia being the bad actor in this. This is where Russia had been taking steps since the Maidan in 2014 to try to shore up its western border. Because, you know, they've been attacked a few times from the West. The French did it. The French and British did it in 1854. And then the fellow named Adolf took a stroll in 1941. So it's, you know, the Russians, you say, God, why are you guys so paranoid? Well, we've only been attacked 3 times. Forgive us for being a little itchy on our trigger finger here. So, you know, it wasn't just Zelenskyy. That's what I think is so critical for people to understand. This is part of a broader plan by the West, particularly in the United States, to try to deal with the threat of Russia and China. And the irony is, instead of weakening the ties between Russia and China, we have now made them really strong. I mean, I asked that of Lavrov specifically in the meeting I had with him, along with Judge Napolitano and Mario Nafal. And, you know, the Lavrov was, you know, guys, I laid out this scenario. There are all these pundits and experts in the West that think they can split you off from China. They've got a variety of strategies. And he goes, basically, it's not going to happen. The relationship Russia has now with China is without precedent in history. They're married. That's the best way to put it. They got married and they're in love.
And you just have to add to that, you know, the same issue that there was some utility between Russia and Tehran. There was some closeness. Actually, I don't even know if you'd say closeness, but some relation between Russia and North Korea. Now then, those are, maybe he's like a serial marriage person, but he's also, you know, got military alliances, agreements, specifically security agreements with both of those two countries as well. The Biden administration set about as an objective is to weaken Russia. And instead, Russia is now much stronger than they were in February 2022. And as you just pointed out, diplomatically and economically, this coalition with BRICS and the other relations with China, et cetera, everything we've tried to do has grotesquely backfired.
Yeah. And they are working, you know, we can go back over the history. Iran and Russia didn't always get along at all. They were at odds. During the Vietnam War, it was the Russians who were supporting the Vietnamese, not the Chinese. The Chinese saw the Vietnamese as a problem. And so they've never been together like they are now. But what's happened is it's a military relationship. It's an economic relationship. It is a financial relationship, and it's diplomatic. It's across the board. And that's why you step back and look at what's happened in March. The first week and a half in March, China and Russia are there conducting a joint naval exercise with Iran. Then the third week in March, the foreign minister of Iran is in Beijing meeting with, I think it was Sergei Rubio, the deputy foreign minister, was there for Russia. So the Chinese, the Russians, and the Iranians are meeting to discuss what? They're talking about what they're going to do, how to deal with the United States and the threat the United States poses. And then last Tuesday, a week ago Tuesday, in Moscow, the same three, Russia, China, Iran, come together. So these guys are now they're working together because they recognize that the United States poses an existential threat to them all. And they are not going to go their own way. They recognize, I think it was Benjamin Franklin who said, if we don't hang together, we shall surely hang separately. And they're hanging together because if you look at it from Russia's standpoint, it's got to make sure it's got some reliable allies on its southern border. So it's
Right.
It's India, and now it's got Iran. So they're in a much stronger position, and that's why the United States, in its efforts, has been trying to subvert all of those countries so that we can come in and gut Russia from below.
Yeah, don't think that's going to work out any better than the previous efforts have. But I'm glad you brought that subject up, especially brought in the issue of Iran, because that is also tied into what's happening with the Russia-Ukraine war, is what's happening in the Middle East with Trump's other diplomatic issues here. And I want to talk about some of those. First of all, let's look at what Trump is doing right now. Now, he has just recently sent Steve Witkoff to meet with the Iranian delegations. He's been actually beating the drums for quite a while now. Trump has, from the Oval Office on 7 March. He thundered that the time is running out and we're going to make a deal. And he said, if we don't get the deal that we're looking for, there's going to be bombing, and all this stuff. Then he kind of ameliorated and seemed to actually talk a little bit more when, ironically, Benjamin Netanyahu was sitting in the Oval Office with him, and he says, yeah, let's talk and we'll have a negotiation, etc. So he sent Steve Witkoff over. Witkoff comes in immediately after that meeting and sounds kind of upbeat.
The conversation with the Iranians will be much about 2 critical points. One, enrichment. As you mentioned, they do not need to enrich past 3.67%. In some circumstances, they're at 60%. In other circumstances, 20%. That cannot be. And you do not need to run, as they claim, a civil nuclear program where you're enriching past 3.67%. Verification will be the key point that undergirds this agreement if we're fortunate enough to get there. And we're going to have very tight verification.
Now, he took a lot of heat from saying that because a lot they're on the right and the conservative, even on Fox News, even some who are big supporters of Trump, they said, no, there can't be any percent. I think I saw Rebecca Heinrichs actually sent out on X post, vehemently distancing herself from that. And then it seemed that Witkoff walked it back the next day. And now he's like saying, actually, no, there can be none. So first of all, what actually is America's intent here?
Well, which part of America? The part that's owned by the Zionists, or those of us who are actually true patriots? I'd say for those of us who are true patriots, the absolute deal with Iran should be cut, and Iran's not building a nuclear weapon. We've got that because they signed that agreement on January 17th with Russia, comprehensive strategic cooperation, and one of the articles, 47 articles, one of those articles specifically addressed non-proliferation. Russia's working with Iran on non-proliferation, which means Russia's not going to allow Iran to produce a nuke. Iran itself says it's not producing it. But the U.S. position, when Donald Trump walked away from the JCPOA during his first term, he was insisting that they walked away because, A, it still allowed Iran to have a missile force. They got to get rid of the missile force. It allowed them to have a peaceful nuclear energy. No, we got to get rid of that too. And then they got to cut off all support, all contact with Hamas, Hezbollah, and the Houthis. That was what Trump gave us the reasons back then. Now, the hope we got out of Saturday was, Witkoff conceded that Iran can continue a peaceful nuclear program. Now, he's wrong about the 20%, getting rid of the 20%. Iran's not going to let that go because that 20% enriched uranium is used to produce medical treatments, isotopes and other things that are used for treating cancer. So it has a legitimate, peaceful purpose. And, I'm sure Iran, with the backing of Russia and China, will say, sure, you want to come in, you can even post permanent inspectors here if you want. We've got nothing to hide anymore. But, I wrote about this, after, Witkoff came out. And I said, you can come back and present this to Trump, and then the Zionist counterattack's going to start, which it has. And they're going to say, no, it can't have any nukes. The nukes are just an excuse. That's not what this issue is really about. This is about destroying Iran, getting rid of a government that is now seen as favorable and friendly to Russia. And until they're out, until the Shah, the descendants of the Shah are reinstalled in power, we're not going to be happy. That's while I hold out some hope that there can be a positive outcome come Saturday with the renewed negotiations, I think the reality is the negotiations will collapse because of the U.S. intransigence and the U.S. demands that Iran commit suicide. The Libyan option that Netanyahu talked about.
That's about the worst example that anyone could ever raise if you want the other side to actually follow it. The Libyan model, where, for those who may not know, Libya gave up its nuclear weapons program to the Bush administration to great fanfare. And then afterwards, we came in with Obama and bombed and then ended up killing Gaddafi in the streets. Not the method you want to go down here. But not being optimistic towards what's coming in this Saturday was something that State Department spokeswoman Tammy Bruce said yesterday.
Our goal remains clear. In the words of Ambassador Witkoff, quote, a deal with Iran will only be completed if it is a Trump deal. Any final arrangement must set a framework for peace, stability, and prosperity in the Middle East, meaning that Iran must stop and eliminate its nuclear enrichment and weaponization program. It is imperative for the world that we create a tough yet fair deal that will endure, and that is what President Trump has asked me to do.
Now, one of the things that really jumped out at me a lot about that was not just that they can't have any reprocessing capacity, but that he said he will only agree to this if it's a Trump deal. That sounds to me like what you just feared, that we're basically asking Iran to surrender.
Yeah. Well, and part of it's like, I'll say, Danny, I'm not going to appear on your show anymore unless you stop driving a Lamborghini. And you're going to go,
I don't have a Lamborghini.
Yeah, exactly. How can you stop driving something you don't have? Well, how can Iran stop building something that's not building? That we're setting up a straw man here. And Iran, I think as a result of the negotiations and talks with China and Russia, Iran came prepared and said, look, we will suspend all enrichment above 20%, and we will allow open inspection. And we won't put a time limit on this because we're serious about getting a peace deal. Trump's not going to take it. They're going to.
And I can see where them agreeing to that too, because that works. That doesn't cause him any problem. It doesn't cause him to lose any sovereignty or anything else. But what about the missile component? Because that seems to me to be one of the other biggest sticking points, that Iran is not just going to surrender the one thing it has that can be deterrent to any would-be adversaries, especially in Israel.
Yeah, no, they're not giving that up. Period. They're not going to disarm. And they saw what happened to Muammar Gaddafi when he disarmed, trusted the promises of the West. Okay, well, you'll be our buddy now. Just give up all those weapon systems that you used to have. He did. And then we had him killed, and killed in a very gruesome way. So, other people in the region, they watched that, they saw that. It wasn't hidden. So, Iran's not going to agree to that. And if Trump is, Trump right now needs a victory, because he's losing on all fronts. He's not getting the deal done in Ukraine. He's going to blow this deal up with Iran. And now he's started a tariff war with China that he can't win, that he's going to lose, and lose badly. And he will have set the house on fire, calculating maybe that, okay, he can try to rebuild starting in January of 2026 before the midterms. He'll have 10 months to put lipstick on the pig. But, he's really right now, he's making every bad strategic decision he could possibly make.
And listen, getting into a war with Iran, as I think you and I have discussed on many occasions, is going to be far worse than the disaster when we went to war in Iraq in 2003.
Yes.
And we can talk about that separately. But here's my big worry, is that there are forces that are really starting to coalesce around that was the same thing that helped lead up to the support for a war in Iraq in 2003. And especially we'll go to Brother Jack Keane.
Oh, yes.
Obviously, the ultimatum that President Trump has issued to them, which is if you don't dismantle the program, then something bad is going to happen. You're likely going to be bombed. These are his words. And what that really means is an Israeli-led, U.S.-supported airstrike, most likely. So here comes Iran. And I am stunned by these guys, Martha, because they have a playbook that they opened up again, and it's to replay the negotiations they did with Obama in 2013 that led to the disastrous 2015 deal. What am I talking about? They're saying, look it. We'll reduce all the highly enriched uranium we have down to a very low percentage like we had back in the so-called nuclear deal, the JCPOA. In other words, we're not going to build a nuclear weapon. We're just going to use it for civilian commercial nuclear power. Of course, that's a bold-faced lie.
Yeah, you talk about what's a bold-faced lie. The exact opposite is the case there. He said, oh, yeah, they'll pull out that old playbook they did in 2015 where they said that we'll only reprocess up to this level, except that's exactly what they did. They never took it to the other side, to the nuclear weapons side. They actually limited themselves, which they did. And they gave up a lot in return, fissile material and other constraints. We had the UN inspectors, et cetera. They did nearly everything that they agreed to. And we did almost none of the stuff that we agreed to before Trump finally withdrew.
Right. And it was when Trump withdrew that then Iran, they did some processing up to 60%. But you got to get the 90% to do nuclear weapons. So it's one of those things. It's an irritant to the West. But, this Jack Keane, he hasn't gotten one damn thing correct, whether he's talking about Ukraine or Yemen or now Iran, even China. Give him a subject, he'll get it wrong. He's reliable in that regard. But this notion that, oh yeah, we're going to waltz in there and we're going to bomb those Iranian sites, and man, they'll never see anything like it. We have launched.
And by the way, I'm sorry. I want to ask you your view on something here, because a separate comment that Keane made a couple of days ago was that, hey, if the Iran's paying any attention, they'll see what. No, I'm sorry. This wasn't Keane. This was, I think it was Secretary of Defense Hegseth. He said, if Iran's paying attention, they'll see what we've done to the Houthis, and that's nothing compared to what we'll do to them. What do you say to that?
I said, yeah, let's pay attention to what we've done to the Houthis. We've run 500 bombing raids since March 15th. And in the last 2 weeks, the Houthis have shot down 4 of our Predator drones, the MQ-9 Reaper. Those go between 30, let's call it 35 million apiece. So they've shot down close to $700 million total of Predators since the start of this Operation Prosperity Guardian. Despite our 500 bombing runs, the Houthis are still launching missiles and have still got the Red Sea shut down. So, yeah, the other countries are paying attention. And they're saying, you know, United States talks a good game, but man, they can't put the ball in the hoop. They can't deliver what they threaten. And I guarantee you, look at what we're struggling against the Houthis, who don't have a massive air defense system. They don't have an air force with fixed wing combat aircraft. They don't have helicopters. They don't have a space program. They don't have a navy. And they don't really have an army.
He did say earlier this week that I think it's off. You tell me what you understand to be the truth. He said that because of that last Israeli attack into Iran in 2024, that they had knocked out all of their air defense systems and they're basically invulnerable. And now then Israel and the U.S. can basically fly in with impunity and just decimate these bombing the nuclear facilities. Is that accurate?
No, it's a lie. It's male bovine excrement, as Ray McGovern calls it. There's independent evidence to prove that they're lying. One of these American video bloggers who was he was traveling through Iran back then, and I happened to watch his channel, and it wasn't at all political. He wasn't the kid was as disconnected from politics as he could possibly be. He was all about dealing with people and checking out the local food and seeing the tourist sites. He was in Tehran on October 27th when Israel launched its retaliatory strike. And he posted some video that he took of Iran's air defense system shooting down missiles. So, he wasn't part of an Iranian propaganda operation. He was just, Joe the Kid tourist, and he saw it for himself, an eyewitness account, a contemporary eyewitness account. You know what? There's a part of me that says, I hope the United States and Israel believe their own nonsense. Go ahead, guys. Do it. Do it. Because it's only after you get punched in the face, knocked to the floor, that you're going to wake up and maybe say, we can't continue to conduct ourselves like this. We've got to change. It's like dealing with a drug addict or an alcoholic. Until they hit rock bottom, they're going to continue their abusive behavior. And frankly, the United States has got to hit rock bottom at some point before we come to our senses, because we have done nothing but promote war and conflict for the last 70 years. 70 years.
Yeah, and I want to show you a clip here from the PBD podcast. A guy named Eric Bowling was being interviewed here, and they were talking about this situation here. I put this on not so much because anything he's going to say is unusual, but because you'll see that he was asked about what he thinks about Iran and can we make a deal with them, and you'll see, I think, conviction in his face that he believes everything he's saying. But what this shows you is that there has been this systematic effort to, you can't call it anything else besides what it is, propaganda by the media. And it doesn't matter whether you're talking Republican, Democrat, that this narrative about Iran is so deeply ingrained that it's you don't even, none of the stuff that you and I are probably talking about here would even enter his ear canal without bouncing back and going straight back out. But this is what a great number of people actually believe.
I think Iran is a state sponsor of terror. They've always been. They will never not be. I think he's right. October 7th wouldn't have happened if Trump were president. I don't think Russia would have attacked Ukraine if Trump were president. Don't try and prohibit them from getting a nuclear weapon at all costs. I'm not sure it's going to happen, but I think the smarter thing to do is continue the massive sanctions on that country until they, I don't know, Patrick, they're run by religious fanatics and they hate the West and they hate everything we're about. I don't think there's any changing their mind, and it's certainly not in our lifetime. I think a tough hand with Iran is better than trying to negotiate with them.
Yeah, see, so they are just irredeemably evil. There's no reason for them to be against us. They're just this state sponsor of terror. They live to have terror, and there's no talking to them. So, Billy, a tough hand is the only thing you can do. What say you?
So let's deal with the facts. It's a lie. Iran's not the #1 sponsor of terrorism. Let's look at the last 25 years. The vast majority, well over 90%, of the terrorist acts that have been recorded every year since 2001 have been carried out by Sunni religious extremists, Al-Qaeda, ISIS, Al-Nusra, Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, just to mention a few. And those groups have been opposed by Iran. In fact, Iran, when fighting in Syria to support Bashar al-Assad, was fighting against ISIS. We claim that we're fighting against ISIS, but there's some credible evidence to show that my old outfit, the Central Intelligence Agency, was funneling support to some of these very Islamic extremists that attacked us on 9/11. So what Iran is guilty of is they provide support to Hamas and Hezbollah. And people are, well, they're massive terrorist organizations. No, they are not. Show me the attacks. I can show you the evidence of the Israeli Foreign Ministry's site in Israel. They have recorded every attack by Palestinians, not just Hamas, but by Palestinians across the board since August of 2000. And when I looked at the data from August of 2000 through April of 2024, during that entire time, it was like a total of 615 attacks over 25 years. And a lot of these were like somebody in a truck would run over a settler. You know, they were more revenge attacks. We're not talking mass suicide. You've not had a single attack by Hamas or Hezbollah against the United States. And people will go back, well, Hezbollah blew up with the Marine barracks at our embassy in 1983. There's evidence that wasn't Hezbollah, it was Amal, another organization. But we forget what we were doing at the time. We had a battleship parked off the coast of Lebanon, sending shells into the Bekaa Valley, killing civilians. And then we're shocked and surprised when some of these civilians get pissed off and retaliate. I mean, at some point we got to stop. But this Bowling got booted from Fox for some allegations of sexual misconduct. I'll leave it at that. He's one to go out and talk and moralize about others, but he's lying, flat out lying about Iran. Iran, yes, are they a Shia religious community? They certainly are. And do they discriminate against some other religions? Yes, they do. I'm not pretending that they're a utopia or a nirvana, but for God's sake, we don't need to be at war with them, because if we attack them, it will start an unraveling of the United States that I don't think we'll recover from.
Yeah, and I want to ask you that in the remaining time we have here. We know what happened when we went into Iraq in 2003 under the false pretenses of weapons of mass destruction and all that. We know what we ended up getting. I won't go through all the list of it, but basically we turned it into this long-term deal. It cost thousands of Americans' lives, hundreds of thousands of wounded and PTSD and traumatic brain injuries, etc., trillions of dollars. And in the end, basically handed over, made them a compliant state of the Shia in Iran that they weren't before. They were a bulwark against it. So that was the cost then.
Yeah.
What would you suggest? And you don't have a crystal ball, but what would you be worried about if we go to war with Iran today?
Well, if we go to war with Iran, so let's assume we don't put any of our aircraft into Iranian airspace. We allow the Israelis to do it. The Israeli Air Force will suffer devastating loss, and then Iran will retaliate and bomb and really hit Israel this time and destroy significant facilities and personnel in Israel. That'll then confront us with, are we going to then attack Iran? And if we do that, it's going to be involved. We're going to be facing down China and Russia at the same time, because they're going to step up and say, no. Israel attacked Iran. It wasn't the other way around. They've done it multiple times. This stops now, and we've got their back. So this could escalate. If we put our own aircraft in, then we're going to have pilots and planes shot down, and we're going to go, what the hell? We thought they didn't have any air defense left. No, there's that acronym on the internet, FAFO. FAFO.
Yeah.
And
we'll find out. So here's a hard question back. Let's say that we do, or Israel, whoever, some combination thereof, does attack into Iran, and they start trying to take out these nuclear facilities, and then Iran does, as you suggest, and shoot down Israeli planes. They fire missiles back that actually strike painful targets in Israel, which they didn't do in the 2 rounds in 2024. They specifically tried to avoid that, but this time they do. Now then you have the real dilemma. Will Israel use its nuclear weapons against Iran?
They'll be tempted, but they'll be doing so under the threat of retaliation by both Russia, China, and other states. Pakistan, even Turkey would come out in defense of Iran on this. It'd be up to the United States to prevent it. Yeah, but they very well could. Right now what's going on in Israel is tremendous political strife, chaos. Bibi Netanyahu is, he's facing almost an uprising within the military. There are retired generals as well as active duty reservists writing letters calling upon other reservists not to show up for service, not to fight, to stay out of Gaza, to stop the war in Gaza, to get the hostages released. So Netanyahu's not in a strong position, and he could do something desperate like that. I can't rule out the chance that they would turn to try to use a nuke. But I think that candidly, that's one of the contingencies that both Russia, China have been planning and talking about with Iran, weighing options. They're not going to just wait until something happens and say, "Oh, now what do we do?"
Yeah, so that just shows that underscores that there is a lot at stake here in getting this right. And if we thought the situation with Iraq was bad in 2003 and all that cost I just talked about just right off the top, the potential costs for this one for the United States are way higher, and it's something that we should not go into. And I know you've mentioned several times that you think that the Trump administration is under a lot of pressure from some pro-Israeli forces, et cetera. And he has certainly got a lot of money in his campaign to be elected, but there may come a point where he has to say, listen, I hear what you guys are saying, but we're not going to take action here that's going to harm our country. How do you see that dynamic?
Well, I think a lot of it hinges upon what the intelligence community, whether they're going to be true, honest brokers in this and tell him the truth, or if they're going to continue to feed the propaganda. I don't have a lot of confidence in Ratcliffe. I still have some hopes that Tulsi can, force them to do the right thing and be honest about it. But if Trump refuses to listen and just gets locked into his own little fantasy world, again, like if you heard him the other day, he was saying that he stopped Nord Stream 2. He did nothing of the sort. He failed in his first term to do anything to, quote, stop Nord Stream 2. He tried to slow it up a little bit. It was Joe Biden that ended Nord Stream 1 and killed one of those pipelines. But, Trump tells stories and presents facts that are really not true. He makes things up. And if he's doing that with Iran, it can have devastating consequences. Because this is all going against this backdrop of what's the war with China, the tariff war with China, which we're also not positioned to win. And he thinks he's dealing with these as separate episodes of different TV shows. This is all one big show. The Chinese, the Russians, the Iran, they're looking at it as an integrated whole. This is part of a broad-based U.S. effort to try to destroy and weaken those countries. And they're saying, no, we're not going to put up with it. We're standing up for ourselves.
Yeah, and it remains to be seen how far anybody's willing to push. And that's why I say it is so vital, in my view, that we not find out that we don't even start any of this. Let this get the best deal you can get negotiated wide. It won't make everybody happy. It'll make a lot of people in Israel unhappy, but there won't be any real consequences to it because we'll always be able to stay safe and defend ourselves and our interest in the region. We don't need any conflict to go down that path. But listen, appreciate you coming on today, Larry. As always, it's a great pleasure to talk about these complicated issues. That's one of the reasons we like to have you on the show, because you can show how these aren't separate episodes of different shows, as you point out, but it's all different pieces that are all flowing together. And it's important to understand how they work together.
Right. And it requires a strategy to deal with it all, and we don't got one.
Well, we'll just have to hope that we can at least avoid that worst outcome. But I truly do appreciate you. Thanks very much. And by the way, if people want more Larry, be sure and go on sonar21.com because he's got a lot of stuff there that you can always find. You don't have to wait just every week to when we have him on the show.
Hey, and by the way, kudos on the video about the generals. Gary worked his magic with Westmoreland and Petraeus and Cavoli. Good job there, Gary.
Yeah, it really was. Yeah, and we really appreciate it. That was quite well received. So we appreciate you giving us the idea. So thank you very much.
Most welcome.
And we will see you. I think let's see. Yeah, we are on this afternoon. Yeah, we're going to have Che Bose on this afternoon for the first time on our show. A lot of you have been asking us to have that on. We're going to be talking about how tensions are rising over Europe's Ukraine policies and what a divided Trump team means to that. Be sure and tune in today at 3 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, and we'll see you then on the Daniel Davis Deep Dive.